So in this video, we're going to talk about saturation, and we discussed it a little bit in the last video, but we're going to continue a little bit with that now. So what is saturation? Is the strength of a color, or how pure is it, all right? How pure a color is. Okay. Now, if we go to tweaking RGB values in order for us to increase saturation, so we're going to start with this number 50, 50, 50. And I want to see if you can guess what this looks like. We mentioned in the last video that this is dark gray, all right? So remember, the values are close to black, close to zero, so it's dark gray. But we also know something else. We know that saturation equals what for that? If you have the same number of red, green, and blue, the saturation must also be what? Must be 0%. So that's the initial starting point. Now I want you to visualize what happened if I change these numbers from 50, 50, 50 to 70, 50, 50, all right? And visually, what I've changed basically is I kept the green and the blue the same, but I went to the red and I added 20 units. The red used to be 50 and I added 20 units. So we cannot call this one anymore dark gray. We have to call it dark red. Why we call it dark red? Because the red is higher than the other two. It's not grayscale anymore. But we also can say that the saturation is low. So low saturation, okay? Why low saturation? Because we only added 20 units of red. What's the whole range of red? 0 to 255. And we added less than 10% of that. So we added 20 units only. All right, let's go and look at that in the color picker in Photoshop. So I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna open the color picker, and I'm gonna start with writing the same values, 50, 50, 50, all right, so that's this color here. That's the one I have, 50, 50, 50, it's that gray. I'm gonna click OK because I wanna actually add it as the old color. So now it's the current color, and I'm gonna switch it to 70, all right, 70. So that's the new color, all right? This is the original one, that's the new one. So we cannot call it dark gray anymore. We have to call it dark red. And notice the saturation went from 0% to 30%, all right, almost 29%. So now I have a question for you. What do I need to do to increase the saturation? If I want to make that thread stronger, what are my options? And you can say, well, option number one is you can increase the red. So if I go and increase the red, I can take the red to 100, so that will increase the saturation. I can take the red to 200, that will increase the saturation even more. And then my last value, I cannot go higher than that. I can take the red all the way to 255. So if I take the red to 255, 50, and 50, now we have a much, much stronger red. This is the 50, 50, 50 that we started with. This is now 255, 50, and 50. And you can see the saturation is set to 80%. It's a lot higher because we took the red all the way to the maximum. So here's another question for you. What if I want to make it more saturated? What do I do to make these numbers more saturated if I want the red to be more saturated? Well, the answer is lower the green and the blue. So if I go and lower the green to 0, lower the blue to 0, I'm going to get a saturation of 100%. So I want you to compare this. This is what 50, 50, 50, the dark gray that we talked about with 0% saturation look like. This is the value we have now, 255, 0, and 0. And that results in what saturation? That results in 100% saturation. So if I go now to my notes and write a couple values that we want to consider, 255, 0, and 0, what does that look like? This will be pure red. And what is saturation for this one? 100% saturation. All right, so that's basically the first change that I want to mention. Now, can you guess what's the RGB value for pure green? All right, pure green. And if you guessed 0, 255, 0, that's correct. That's 100% saturated green. Can you guess the RGB values for pure blue? That would be 0, 0, 255. What saturation is this one? Also 100%. So notice now we looked at RGB values. We started with putting the same number in all of the three, and we understood that that would result in grayscale, varying from black 0, 0, 0 to white 255, 255, 255. And now we understand we can increase saturation. So I'm going to write another question here. What's in RGB value? In RGB values that indicates saturation, all right? And let's see if you can guess that correct. If I gave you RGB numbers, what's in these numbers will help you guess or indicate what saturation are they? And the answer, if you guessed it, is the differences between them. Okay, the differences between them. The higher the differences between them, the more the saturation that we have in a pixel. So if you look at, if the differences between them is 0, that means the saturation is 0. So if the amount of red, green, and blue are exactly the same, that means saturation is 0. And if the differences between them is the maximum, 255 units, then that means saturation is going to be 100%. So you can gauge saturation by looking at RGB numbers and seeing how far apart they are. All right, let's see if that actually makes sense logically beyond just the mathematical numbers. Well, the fact that one number is higher than the other two means that color is much more present in that pixel, much more stronger in that pixel, while the other two are weak. All right, so that's why you're going to get to see that color a lot more than the others. All right, now what if the three colors are close to each other, like this case or this case? That means all the colors are at a draw, like we have a balance between the three colors. And every time we have a balance between the three colors, they're going to overwrite each other, and that results in grayscale. So that's why the difference between them indicate what saturation is.